Good morning, everyone. So Saturday for us here on the homestead. Got an interesting storm coming in. 2 to 3 inches of snow, maybe half an inch of rain, 40 to 50 mile an hour winds. Not really sure. We're just gonna wait and see, but we're gonna get the animals taken care of real quick this morning, and then we're gonna sharpen the chainsaws to get them ready, just in case we have to cut some more trees out of the way to get in or out. So we're gonna bring you along for that while we go, get the chainsaws ready. So let's go take care of the animals real quick, and then we'll get to sharpening chainsaws. We'll be right back, chickens. We're going to go ahead and put a blanket on the big horse, just because of all the rain and the ice coming, to keep him dry. And we're going to throw down a bale of hay and feed him inside the barn. Same reason, just try to get him to stay out of the rain. So Sue's going to go up and get a bale of hay and toss it down.
And we're gonna go put a blanket on Gus. And remember, Gus is blind on this side, so sometimes he gets a little nervous about stuff like this. But usually we're able to put this on in the field without haltering him. Good boy. Oh, good boy. Here he had never been blanketed and he was really nervous about having it done, but he's had it on 3 or 4 times now and he doesn't mind it near as much as he used to. So he's all blanketed up so he'll stay nice and dry in the storm, and that'll keep him a little bit warmer.
So we'll come back out later when it starts storming and put some of the hay in their actual stalls to get them out of the weather. But for now, we're going to let them stay outside and eat out of their round bale like they want to anyways.
Come get your cookie. Good boy.
All right, we're going to grab the chainsaw right here and check on the chickens on the way by. All right, so we're in the shop here. We have our 2 chainsaws. We got one in the vise, one's ready to go as soon as we get this one done. Basically what we want to do is we're going to touch the chain up, make sure it's good and sharp. We're going to fuel and oil the saw up. We won't bother to show you the fueling and oiling. You pretty much know that should be pretty straightforward. We really wanted to touch on how we sharpen a chainsaw. Now keep in mind, we are not professional woodcutters, we are not professional chainsaw people, but we get asked all the time how we sharpen a chainsaw. My general philosophy on a chainsaw is it should pull me through the log. So if I set my saw on the log with the throttle open, I almost want to be able to hold up on the saw a little bit. You shouldn't have to force your saw. If you're forcing your saw, in my opinion, the chain is too dull. Some of the mistakes I see happen a lot are people tend to tighten their chain too tight. So when you fire up the saw, if you hear that noise, that tight chain noise, there should be some slack in that chain. You don't want a ton of slack, but there should be some slack. You see how it's hanging down just off the bar a little bit? To me, that's just about right. The issue that you'll have, or that I have seen personally, if you get the chain too tight, it tends to get hot, and then it stretches, and then it loosens, and then you tighten it again. And you're always tightening your chain. If you're finding that every time you stop for fuel, you're having to tighten your chain, in my opinion, the chain is too tight. The other thing that I will point out here as we go, don't skimp on files. And I don't mean go buy a really expensive file. I mean use a new one quite frequently. I buy them, by the box from my chainsaw shop. You can see that box is $15, and there's a whole pile of files in there. So change it frequently. If it's not actually making that nice dragging, cutting feeling for you, if it's sliding right along nice and smooth, it's dull. It needs to be changed. The other key is gloves. Probably should wear safety glasses. I never do. They impede my vision, I find, because mine are all scratched up and dirty. First thing I'm going to point out is your rakers. So I'm going to take one glove off just for the purpose of video. But this little tooth right here is what we call a raker. And what that does is that keeps this tooth here that does the cutting from getting too deep into the wood. So one thing that you want to do is you do want to file these rakers a little bit. As you file this tooth back, this raker needs to be filed down. If you file this too much, it's going to just dog the saw right out into the wood. It's going to kick back. It's dangerous. I find with a new chain like this, a couple passes with the decent flat file, and we'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to do just a couple passes, and I like to do my rakers first in case I bump the tooth. So you hear how that ground in? So you see, that's all I did. I just knocked the point off the raker. They make a gauge you can put on there and file down to. I've just never used one. A lot's going to depend on what you're cutting for wood too. If you're predominantly cutting softwood and you're cutting big softwood and not doing a lot of limbing, you can take the rakers a little deeper. If you're cutting predominantly hardwood, you don't want the raker quite as deep because it's going to bite a little harder. The saw is going to vibrate and chatter. But we're going to go ahead and do the rakers real quick, and then we'll bring you back and show you how we file the tooth itself. Okay, so we've been completely around half of the chain. Every other tooth is on the opposite side of the chain, and that's to cut a normal hole. Like if all your teeth are on one side of the chain, the saw would want to cut right around in a circle. So that's why we have two different sides. And that's why it's important to sharpen both sides similar. If you got a saw that tends to cut off at an angle, that's because you're favoring one side more than the other when you sharpen. So just kind of work on that. I believe if you think about it, it's the sharper side will be the long side, but don't quote me on that. Just kind of, look at what you're doing and keep an eye on. So as you're filing this, I'm gonna bring you in here and show you a couple things on this one as well. There's a mark on the tooth here that you'll see. And I believe that's kind of an indicator of when you should change your chain. They're putting it on there, you don't file back past this mark type thing. But that's the angle also of the factory cut. So how you turn your file this way makes a difference. If you were cutting just softwood, you could almost file straight across and it will cut a lot faster. If you're cutting hardwood, you need a little steeper cut. I tend to flatten mine out about maybe 5 degrees more than that line right there. So about like what you see here. I'm going to file one, and then I'll show you, what's going on here. Also, I'm going to point out that a vise, you can get the ones you drive into a tree stump that work well, but for me, the whole key to sharpening a saw for me is getting it stable so I can actually do the job. I am not good at sitting on the tailgate and sharpening a saw. I can do it, but it won't be as sharp as it will be if I'm doing it here. I like my glove. I have an old pair of gloves in the shop I keep for this. You'll see why. I really like to ride that file on the other side, but keeping your file level this way too is important. And if you watch the tooth, it'll sort of show you that for you. If you get it angled like that, you'll see that you get a gap here. So you're sort of just looking to keep that that file fairly level. And I like to rotate it a little bit as I go across, maybe about 1/3 of a turn. And what you're doing is you're going to go until you see just a slight amount of filings coming all the way across the top of the tooth. You'll see the first couple passes, the filings only be on 1 or 2 spots. And as you go, you'll see filings build the whole length of the tooth, and that lets you know that you've done a good job and you've cleaned all the gaps. So if you look real close and under there, you'll see it's all shiny all the way across that tooth. And now we know we've sharpened the whole tooth. If we look close to the top of it, we'll notice there's no nicks or dents. If you've hit a rock before, you may see a nick or a dent predominantly right in this point. So this point right over on this side is the most important part of it all. If that point is nubbed off, it's not going to start the chip and start the cut. So the other thing you'll see me do too as I do this is I'll tap my file like that to knock the loose filings off of it. So as I get going, I'm basically just, as you see, I'm taking a little bit of angle out of that tooth. And probably around 5 or 6 passes for me on this chain, it's cleaning it up. If I'd have hit a rock, I may have to go a lot more. So the other thing you want to make sure of as you're angling your file this way and this way, it's also up to you to keep the file the right height. And what I mean by that is you can file right down, straight down into the chain, or you can drag the file up to the point where your tooth doesn't have a concave. So if you look really careful, the tooth must have just on this back side right here. Well, actually, if we can look at this tooth, you can see it a little better. It starts at a point and it comes back around with a little bit of a cup, almost a little bit of a C. And if you're not keeping your file at the right elevation, like that, you'll lose that C. See, if I pull the file up like this, it'd be flat and it won't cut well. And if I go down too deep, it's getting really deep and I'm weakening the chain. So as a general rule of thumb, it's about 2/3 of the file, maybe 3/4 of the file is down in the chain, and the rest is exposed like that. So it's important to that's important to note, because that's another common mistake I see is people will either get that file up too high and they have a flat tooth, or they get it down too low and they start filing into the chain and they don't get a good sharp edge right on the very top against that file like that. So we're going to go ahead and run around this side of the chain. We'll turn the saw around and do the other side. Maybe even a little closer. Yep. So that's the first side. We're going to go ahead and turn the saw around and do the other side. And going back to doing our rakers first. And you notice how smooth that sounds, how it's got that grind sound all the way across. That's a good sharp file. You see, I'm not really having to put a lot of force against the file that way. It's kind of digging in on its own just because it's good and sharp. That brings us all the way back around. So again, to recap, you know, I'm not saying this is the way you sharpen a chain. This is how we sharpen a chain. Seems to work real well for us. Again, my philosophy is that I should actually have to hold up on the saw a little bit as I'm cutting the log, not push on it. If you're forcing the saw, you're just getting things hot. Things just aren't cutting like they should. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. We're going to do the other saw. You guys don't need to watch. It's all the exact same process. Like I said, the big thing is make sure you've got a good sharp file. Keep some new files around. And we find, for us anyways, on the Rakers, a decent flat file. And again, it depends on how sharp it is. You know, you don't want to take a ton off that raker. That is a safety device. It keeps the saw from like digging right in or kicking if you hit the tip on something. But this file, about the sharpness it's at, we find 2 light passes on a raker every time we file the chain. Seems to be about right. If it's a brand new file, maybe 1 really light pass. You know, you're basically trying to maybe take a 64th of an inch or, you know, 10,000ths of an inch or whatever. Just a very minute amount off that raker each time you go down in. If you get that, you know, if you go to cut a piece of hardwood and that saw is like really chattery, not kicking or anything, but just chattery, you know, just vibrates a lot. You've probably taken too much off your raker and the teeth are actually like slamming into the tree every time they come in, and you're feeling that through the saw. That's hard on the chain as well. So it's a fine balance, but anyway, that's how we sharpen a chain. We're going to get the other saw ready and get ready for this storm. Hopefully the power doesn't go out. Hopefully we won't have to cut trees out of the road, but you've watched us cut trees out of the road before, so you may get to watch it again. Any questions, leave them down below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.